Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome back to Scrap Mechanic with Lyte. So the weights and measures thing went over pretty well, and, well, we're back with some more right away. Because, well, this one could be really handy, and there's a lot of people who could use this information. And it's about these thrusters. So, we figured out last time about how much they weigh. It appears they weigh 16 wood, not the 17 I thought last time. So 16 wood, that's 3 metal and a wood, counteract the thrusters. But that's not what this episode is about. This is about how much thrust a thruster can thrust. Let's hook these up, actually. 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. So we'll hit the button, get them thrusting. And then, you'll notice I made a couple of improvements to my scale on the suggestion of someone on Reddit. Their name was Vuli, something like that. They suggested I add... Okay, let's turn these guys off before they cause real damage. They suggested I add arms to these baskets and sensors on the middle post, such that when these moved, you could see which side is lower. Well, that's an interesting idea if your basket came unbalanced, so you put too much on one side or the other, it would shift and trigger a false positive. So instead, I put the arms up on the beam itself at an angle such that any movement of the beam will cause it to trigger the sensor. There's a little bit of give because there is a little bit of uncertainty in the balance. So it still detects being off by like 1 wood still. So like if we put an extra wood on here and we let it go, it'll take a second, but it should fall enough to the left side over time. Don't make a liar out of me, scale. Man, does it seem to not be moving. Okay, let's give it a little more assistance. Hello? Is it not moving at all? What the heck? There we go. So it's usually more sensitive than that, but I was just getting impatient. But when it's imbalanced, it throws out a little duck on the side that's weighing too much. I was just being impatient because we need to get to the thrust. Okay, so re-engage the safety. Now, we're going to have these thrusters thrusting, so we want to figure out how much load they can carry. We know that they can carry at least themselves again. So we just add their weight again to this side. And then anything we add after this is the load that they can then carry directly upwards. So we've got 4 thrusters, so we're going to need quite a bit of load here. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is 100. Let's say 125 plus another 15. It's 140 metal. Plus a little bit more. I think that's about right. It might be a little bit off. So we come back over here. We turn on the thrust, and we throw the switch here, and it's pretty well balanced. But you'll notice that they are pushing the basket in a weird way. You need to not leave thrusters unsupervised on this scale. They tend to do odd things. But if we leave it like that, it is roughly balanced. It's got an extra stone over here that I'm not sure why it's there. Oh, and it says that side's heavier. So let's take that stone off and see if we can get a nice round number. Nah, it's pushing towards the thrusters this time. Let's unfortunately put a wood back on top here. Come on. Because if you recall, well, each stone is worth 2 wood. So if the stone is too much and without the stone is too little, the wood should balance it out. But these thrusters, like I said, they're a little weird. They have little spurts now and then. So now this side is not heavy enough. So it's somewhere between 1 and 1.5 more than that stack. Which doesn't turn out to be nice numerically. But these thrusters are weird enough that you just have to get close. And when you're working with, like this is 100 and then 25 and 15. So that's 140 metal for 4 thrusters. So you just take the 140, you divide by 4, you get 35. So roughly 35 metal per thruster for lifting capability. Because you've got the original thruster, the thruster holding itself up, and then you've got all of the extra. And then if we cut these down and cut that in half, it works out about the same at that point as well. But this is about how much they weigh. So 35 metal, which would be, let's see, you multiply that by 5, you get 175 wood. So if you got a vehicle that's 175 wood, you can just lift it with 1 thruster. It might not be balanced. So if you need more thrusters for good balancing, you might end up needing a heavier material. So if we apply that, we can come on over to this little contraption over here, where we've got roughly the right amount of material on here. We throw this switch, and it pretty much just sits there right on the ground, and you can see it bounces a little. So for some reason, when it gets to the ground, it gets a little more force, and when it's up higher, the amount of force it exerts drops. Not entirely certain what would cause that phenomenon, but it's just how the thrusters work. And then if we push this button, it fires the 5th thruster that was in the middle, and it pushes us upward. But we were in the middle of something weird, so we came a little off balance, so we start floating away. Let's get rid of these. Let's go back down to the ground. Let's float back up. And you can see you continue upwards a little bit after releasing the thruster, but then you come to a stop. So if we hop off, you can see it just hovers there in the air, and then it hits something and bounces up. So it gets to the next foot down and realizes, oh, I should have more thrust than I do, and it pushes itself back up. It's a weird little oscillating motion that it does. But you can see vertically, you've got the forces balanced. The force of the thrusters versus the force of gravity. And it just stays there. It might be a little bit heavy because it's coming back down. But when you press the button, it fires this 5th thruster, which increases your acceleration upwards. But apparently, there's atmospheric friction, or else you would never stop. Because you need a force to counter the acceleration from this thruster. Because Newton's laws, object in motion stays in motion. But we've got ourselves a nice hovering thing. You can do a little more work to get it totally balanced between gravity and thrust, such that you can have a almost perfectly stable hovering object. Now this one is not perfect, because the math on the thrusters does not appear to be perfect at the moment. So a little more rigorous study, and we can probably get something that is perfectly able to stay at a single height without any serious altitude detection. Now this one, it's a little heavy, so you take something off, but then you go, oh, but that makes it unbalanced, and it's going to start flying away, and then you take the thing off the other side. Does it start going back up? That might be better. But it's an interesting thing. Now we know how much thrusters weigh, we know how much thrusters thrust, and I'll try to do a little more scrap science on various other things that people are curious about, like being able to measure the amount of friction between materials and see if different materials have different coefficients of friction, whether or not the ground has different coefficients of friction, which is a little rough because it's not perfectly flat. It's hard to measure these things accurately when you don't have a perfectly flat surface. We'll see whether or not increased thrust downward causes more friction, having more weight causes more friction, because that's kind of how friction's supposed to work. But if you have any other scientific things that you'd like to see tested, I would be happy to give them a try. I know certain things about physics, but I don't necessarily know at the moment how one would measure and test torque. But I'll look into that and let you know when I figure that out. But as for this little episode on thrusters, their weight, and their thrust, I think that's about all. And as always, when exiting your world, make sure to disengage the safety. Let's give me a little seat. So, feel free to leave comments with whatever other science you'd like to see happen. This particular episode was recommended by Lieutenant Sam, and I had already been planning on making this episode, but thanks for the suggestion anyway. But if you have any other suggestions for scrap science you'd like to see, feel free to leave a comment, and I will see you in the next episode of Scrap Mechanic with Lyte.